This is a demo for Pronto plates, also known as polyester plates. The brand I'm using is from Renaissance Graphics. I've tried other plates, some are good, some aren't. Tamarind sells a plate that is good, but it's much more expensive. The Pronto plate from Renaissance has been working really well for me, so I recommend it. I'm going to make a registration mark on this. This plate is 11 by 17 inches. And I'm using this size plate because it fits through my copier. If you use a color copier, it puts down plenty of toner and it heats up really well so that you don't really have to heat your plate in order to fix the toner onto the plate. If you are using a Xerox machine or a laser printer, you may want to either use a hot plate, like a dry mount press hot plate, or you could try running it through the Xerox machine or the laser printer without an image a couple times, and then it'll pass over the heat fuser unit and help to get that toner really melted onto the plate. If it's not, it'll lift up when you're printing. So if your image is lifting off your plate when you're printing, it's probably because it wasn't heated enough. I've tried using a heat gun, but it's really hard to use. It warps the plate. So I'm putting registration marks on. The nice thing about these plates is they're translucent so that you can see the image on the other side. And then I'm drawing my marks on the back side, which is great because it won't print. If you use T registration, you can do that now. That'll be a different topic. If you, I'm doing this because this is the size of my paper, and the size of my paper is the same size as the width. So that's my registration. When I place my paper down, I can see that I want to line it up with the edge of the plate and the top of that registration line. The next thing I'm going to do is get the water ready. I would normally do this off the press, but since we have a camera set up, I'm doing it here. I have one cold water, bowl of cold water, one empty bowl. The empty bowl is to squeeze your dirty water into when you're working, so you can keep the one bowl clean. And these are pH papers. When you're getting ready to print with these plates, it's important that the pH be between 4.5 and 5.5. So these papers will tell you that. And I'm going to use a mixture of polyester plate fountain solution and gum arabic. And I'm going to put, you can measure this if you want, 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce in your water. Mix it together, and then dunk your pH paper into the water, and you simply compare it to the chart. It's not on that side, so I'm going to flip it over, and you compare it to the one it most closely resembles. In this case, it looks like about 4.5. Okay, so if you're, that's on the acid end. If you wanted to, you could add a little bit of water to make that a little more neutral. Now I've got my water ready. We're going to set up the press. I've positioned my plate here in the center of the plate backer. You need a plate backer. You can also put this on a stone if you want to, but you can't put this directly on the press for several reasons, one of which you won't be able to print because this yoke will not go down far enough. So this is going to be applying pressure to the inked print or plate when we pass over it. We need to line it up. I've released it so I can move it manually. I've centered this plate so that it's inside the scraper bar slightly. So your scraper bar, I like to have it just be a little bit bigger than the plate so that the plate gets even pressure across the whole thing. And then I'm marking where to put this down. We're going to have a tympan, we're going to have newsprint with this tympan on top when we're printing, so you can't see where to bring it down visually. So you need to mark the press in order to know the correct place to bring the pressure down. So we've marked it. I put a piece of tape here on the movable press bed and a piece of tape corresponding to it on the frame, which does not move. And then when we move the print through, it's going to be done about here. I'm going to put a piece of tape right here so I'll know when to stop. Okay? So everything's lined up, it's centered. I put my marks down, and you'll see here in a minute why that's important. When you are coming back to your starting place, give it a little shove so that it locks into place. Okay. So now that we have that position, we're going to go ahead and put the tympan back up here. This is a tympan. It's going to go on top of the plate, and it has grease on one side for printing. We're going to set up the ink. Okay, so now that we have the press set up, I've also torn my paper in advance, prepared the water. We're going to go ahead and get the ink ready. I've chosen a roller here, a rubber roller that is a nice comfortable size. We could probably print this with a brayer, a nice brayer, but this is easier, I think. So I'm going to show you something real quick. This is called the rollout length. There's a screw here in the bottom of the handle. I'm going to place it face down, or actually I'll place it face up, and then I'm going to watch it as it rolls around, and it's face up again here. So this is my rollout length. In other words, that's one revolution of the roller. And it's just a good thing to be aware of, because you don't need to ink anything more than that on the palette. And it just keeps you kind of focused on, this is the area I need to ink up. Okay, so I've got my roller. I have some ink out, but I'm going to take some more out so you can see how to do it properly. You probably won't be able to see real well because of the black ink and so forth with the camera. But I'm going to try to keep my flat surface here flat to the ink while I'm removing it. So instead of gouging it in. And the reason for that is the surface of the ink dries out quickly, and you want that skin, if it dries, it's going to form a skin. You want the skin to be flat, not, if you dig into the ink, it can ruin the whole can if it starts to dry out. Okay, so try to remember that. The ink here on the palette, we also call this a slab. I'm just working it a little bit. The ink has a quality, kind of like butter. It's hard when you take it out of the fridge, but if you worked it a little bit, it would become softer as it warms up. So the same thing here, it just softens the ink a little, makes it roll out a little smoother, quicker. You don't have to do this, but it helps a little bit. And you can put a bead of ink on the palette if you like, or I like to spread this like butter. And of course, be careful not to dig the knife into the roller, but so kind of an even layer. You can always add. It's easier to add than it is to remove. First time I roll it, I'm going to just turn the roller a little bit, turn it again, turn it again, turn it again, and I'm going to keep turning it like that every time it comes back to my body. And I can tell already that I'm going to need more ink, so I'm just going to stop now since I can see I'm going to need more. And I'll put a little bit more on, just like I did before. Now, if I just rolled like this, back and forth, nothing would happen, because I just inking the same spot over and over again. So that's why you need to turn the roller. And then to get it even more even, I'm going to roll sideways. Same thing, I'm turning it when I come back to the starting point, and then I'm going to turn the roller again. So now this is a 180 turn from where we started. And if you want to get fancy, you can just kind of flip it around like that. And the idea is that you're changing the areas where the ink is to even it out. You want everything to be the same in the ink. Okay, so now that I have my roller ready, we can go ahead and put the plate on the press and start printing. Okay, we're back. We're going to start printing now. And I've waited till this moment to dampen the plate, because once you dampen it, in order to keep working, you need to keep it damp. So I'm going to show you a little trick I learned that seems to help quite a bit. I've got a nice clean piece of newsprint underneath my plate. I've got it upside down, it doesn't really matter, but I'm taking my sponging water and I'm just going to put a whole bunch on here and let it kind of soak in for a minute. So I'm pre-wetting the plate, and the idea is if you get your plate really saturated with water, you can see it starts to get kind of translucent because it's so saturated. Part of that color change too is the newsprint changing underneath it. That's good enough. It's going to hold water for a little longer. The main complaint I get about these plates from people is that they lift up when you're printing, but they really work well if you can get them wet and keep them wet, and they won't lift up on you. So I just flipped it over. I could see that it wasn't completely saturated when I flipped it over, so I'm putting it back on its front. And you can do this a few minutes ahead of time. You can even put it in a tray of water and just let it soak until you're ready to print. It won't hurt anything. Just be careful, you want your hands to be clean. If you have any grease on your fingers, it might transfer to the plate and print. So I think that's soaked pretty good. I've pre-marked my press bed earlier where I wanted my plate to be. So I'm going to go ahead and position the wet plate at those marks. And from the center outward, I'm going to sponge it. And that tape is just going to be a nasty piece of black ink if I don't remove it. So those are coming off. And at this point, just remember to keep the plate damp. You can see it's got a little bit of like air trapped underneath it. That'll go away once we print it. In fact, at this point, if you wanted to, you could, and I think I'll do it, you could go ahead and set the pressure, because we've got the press set up, but we haven't set the pressure for the presser bar. So let's do that first. I'm going to take 2 pieces of newsprint, which are kept in the back of the press, place those over my penguin, and then place my tympan on top. And we've got grease we keep here. There's a jar near the printmaking supplies. If you need more, put that back. You don't need a lot of grease. Line up these tape marks that I have. You can't see, put them over here, because you can see I can't tell where to put it down. It's covered up. So now I have it lined up. I've moved these pins to the slot, and when I start turning this, it will engage. I'm going to lower my pressure here. There's no pressure because I think somebody used a stone, printed a stone. When we're all printing the same thing, plates, The pressure shouldn't need to be adjusted much because we're all printing the same thing. So I'm just turning it clockwise slightly and then lifting the pressure bar so I can tell how it feels. And this has been loosened. This screw connects directly to this big screw, and when it is tightened, you can't move this. And the reason for that is when we're printing, sometimes it will loosen on its own, and we want it to stay at the pressure you set it. So if you tighten this a little against this, you're assured that it's not going to move. If you need to move it, you need to undo this, and then adjustment. And then if you want to tighten it, you can tighten it. But just remember to undo this when you're adjusting the pressure. Okay, so we have the pressure set now. I'll pull this down. And once you start cranking it through, you want to keep going until you reach the mark on the press. If you stop in the middle of your print, you'll get a line across it. Of course, we're not printing yet. We're just checking the pressure. So this gives me a good idea of how the pressure is feeling. When I get down here to the end, I'm going to lift this. I'm going to pull the handle out to disengage the chain that turns the press and pull it back. And give it a little shove to lock it in. And I don't know if you can see it on there, but I got a little bit of grease on this piece of newsprint, so I'm going to throw this away in the recycling later. Now this plate has dried out a bit because we've been messing around setting the pressure, so I need to really get it wet again and give it a good soaking. And now we're ready to print. Okay, so I'm getting it extra wet just for a bit, and then now I'm going to squeeze out all the extra water that I can get from my sponge, and maybe give it another sponge and squeeze it out again. When you're squeezing out your sponge, you don't want to wring it like this because you'll tear it and then little pieces of sponge get in your ink. So just be gentle. You can squeeze it pretty hard, get all the ink out, all the water out, and then a really good technique is to get this thing as dry as you can. You've got your plate wet, right? It's actually damp, it's not wet. I'm going to stick just the corner of my sponge in here just to get some water. All the water is concentrated here, and that puts down about a teaspoon of water, and then I'm going to just hit the front of my sponge to get that damp. Go across it. You can go ahead and you can just let your sponge float over the whole thing, kind of both directions, okay? You don't need to put any pressure down. If you scrub it, it's not going to do a better job. In fact, it does a better job if it's light. It picks up more water. So what you're going for here, you don't want to see any visible water. I can see the visible water on the plate backer out here, but on the plate, it's absorbed into the plate. So if you see any drops of water at all, you've got too much water on your plate. And that's important. That is kind of the key, actually. Sponging is the key to making this process work. Now I've got room here with this small image. I can put my roller down on the plate and roll across it without a problem. And that was 5. I think I can do 6 pretty comfortably. This just takes a little getting used to. As soon as you quit rolling, you want to come back and squeeze your water on the plate. Go around the edges first, go through the image, flip it over. This is the dry side of my sponge, and dry it off. So you're kind of getting it wet and then you're drying it off. Okay, so I'm going to do 5 more rolls. There's no hurry. You can. I'm picking it up a little. I don't know if you can see that. And turning it at the end of each roll. Immediately wet it. Even if you have something to do, go ahead and wet it. You can come back and re-wet it before you print. Let's do 5 more. You can't see the ink you're depositing because the image is black to begin with, and the ink is black, so you can't tell if anything's happening, but it is. You just have to trust yourself. So that was 3. It's probably enough ink for a proof. I'm going to do 1 more, and I'm not recharging my roller in between. I will recharge it after this. Now I can feel the ink grab the roller as I'm rolling across this image. So it's not like you're hydroplaning with too much water on the plate. So that's plenty. I'm going to go ahead and put my roller up and print this. And the first one will be on newsprint. I'm going to take, you always use 1 piece of newsprint as a buffer. So I'll put 2 pieces on here. 1 to print on and 1 is the extra. And I'm going to run this through. Line up my marks. Bring the pressure down. I'm going to tighten the pressure just a little bit. I'll loosen that, just tighten it a tad. Down again. It didn't lock in. You can hear it, you see nothing's happening. It's because I didn't line up the pin with the slot. Now it's locked. The pressure's too light. I wonder what happened. Okay, let's do it again. I like to lean the tympan up against the yoke of the press with the grease facing outward. Just lift it up. And this is the first proof. It's light. It should be light. If it was the darkness that you want the print to be as finished print, you've over inked it at the beginning too much. You want it to come up gradually. So I'm going to repeat what we just did. The only difference here, and again, I don't know if you noticed, but I got it wet right away. And I'm just going to leave that. I can put too much water on. See how much water's in that sponge? It's amazing. I'm going to let it soak while I get my roller charged and add some more ink. About 6 or 8 rolls, and then we're going to dry this off. So the lighter you can go across that, the better. If you think you might have too much water in your sponge, just squeeze some out. That might be a little better. Repeat. Did 6. The magic number is however many you can print before you think that the plate's starting to dry out. If it dries out, it will start lifting on you, and it may dry roll. That was 2. I am putting just a little bit of pressure down, just a downward pressure, not a lot. You don't need to grip the roller, it's not going to go flying. So there's no reason to get a blister. I see people get blisters, they just try too hard. It's pretty funny. But then I used to do that too. So, so that was 3. Sometimes the hardest thing is counting. I'm going to do 4 again and compare it to the first print. This should be darker. I'm also going to increase the pressure just a tiny bit because I think it was a little light. So now we're going to print. That was 4. A little water on there. my roller back. Always put the roller in the stand. Don't leave it on the table because it could roll off and fall on the floor and damage the roller. 2 sheets of newsprint. Open, grease side up. Release the press, move it under the pressure bar, bring it up to the tape. And the pressure bar down, I'm going to loosen this nut, the screw, tighten it a little, tighten it back up, put that down, and you want the pressure to be, so you almost have to use 2 hands to get it through. And then when you're releasing it, you want to get underneath it and use your legs, not your back, to lift the pressure bar. Now we got a little grease on this newsprint again, so again I'm going to take that newsprint and get rid of it. And then our second proof. The newsprint prints really nicely. The problem with this is it's not really archival and it wrinkles because it absorbs the water. So if you wanted to print on newsprint, you'd have to find a way to flatten it. So that print is darker than the first one. So I think we're ready to go to good paper. For students starting out, I'd suggest maybe doing 1 or 2 more prints just to make sure you have your ink right. And then also I'm going to add just a tiny bit of ink for my next print. I can just tell from experience, you could use a little more ink. It's better to start with less ink. It helps to have a buddy sponge for you when you're starting out. And then you can just pay attention to the inking, and your buddy can pay attention to the sponging. I've developed a way of printing alone that's pretty efficient. By keeping a real firm, tight grip on the roller, you can keep it here while you're sponging. These rollers are really expensive, so you don't want them falling. And then just keep your sponge here until you're ready to print, as long as this is clean. So if there was grease or anything on the press like that, you'd have problems. So this is number 2. I'm going to do 4 again. Now if I was going to do 5, if I'm going to go to good paper, I'm going to do 1 additional roll. And some people may ask, well, why not use more ink and then roll it less? So instead of giving it 5 sets of 5 rolls, I might give it 3 sets with more ink. And the reason is the details will fill in if you have too much ink. And also rolling it more gives it you have more control, and it's easier to get it even. Now I have too much water. I don't know if you can see that. I've got a little water on my roller. I can actually take my sponge and get rid of some of that water. Dry my sponge out a little. I think that was 3. Okay, so this is 4. So when you go to good paper, you're going to need a little more ink because the good paper is going to be more absorbent. So you can either add a little bit more ink, you can add an extra pass, an extra set of rolls, or both. That was 4. I think I'm going to do 5, but instead of just rolling again, I'm going to recharge my roller. Now every image is a little different. If you had an image that had a lot of ink on it, you'd have to recharge your roller more often. I'm able to get away with just doing it without going back for more ink because this image is so light and it's also very small. So it doesn't really require a whole lot of ink. Okay, so we'll print. When you're printing on good paper, usually the paper has two sides, a smooth side and a rough side. So you want to usually choose the smooth side. I'm putting it, lining it up to my registration mark up here to the edge of the plate. And I'm going to put a piece of newsprint on top. I'll run it this way this time. Give the press a nice little shove, kind of aggressive, going back, it'll lock in easier. Yeah, let's see how this did. So this is a very thin Gampy paper. I think this one was made in Japan. I'll print on a heavier paper too, but I think we'll go to a different plate. This plate's quite easy to roll up because there's plenty of room, it being a small image. You know, there's plenty of room to, for me anyhow, to put the roller down on the plate, okay, and not go off of the plate. I'm going to show you what happens when you go off of the plate. And then I'll just do this a few times until the plate curls around the roller. There we go. So that's going to happen to everyone. Okay, I want to show you what to do when that happens. First thing is don't panic. Okay, so if it rolls, I'm going to do that again. I'm going off of the press plate onto the press bed. And then when I'm rolling back, it catches it, right? Because the plate's starting to dry out. I rolled over it and the plate's, this is sticky, the ink is sticky and the plate's just sticking to it. It's a natural thing, right? So to avoid that, you have to kind of learn where to stop and start. If you get over it, it's a little easier to see it. You can put it down directly instead of being back here. Also going slow, you know, helps. And then I'm going to do that again. If you keep going or you stop and you try to pull it off, that's a bad thing. Just pull it back the way you came, okay? And then you can address the issue. Maybe the plate's getting too dry completely. You need to stop and like give it a real good soak again and then dry it off and continue printing. That would be my guess most of the time if it's continuing to happen. I'm going to do it again. You can kind of see it starting to lift. There we go. Just roll it back and wet it. Don't try to pull it off or anything like that. Another alternative, if you need to, is, and I'm going to do that on this next print, is to print this direction and go. I'll show you that technique. Okay, so we're back. I've got a different image, and I'm putting a image that goes almost to the edges of the plate. To show you how you can deal with that, because these plates are pretty small and that's the only thing I don't like about them. It's hard to make a big image, and even this looks quite a bit bigger, but even this is smaller than I'd like it to be, but we're also limited by the size of the Xerox. You can get bigger plates. 18 by 24 is a common size, and then draw by hand onto them. So if you want to do a bigger Pronto plate, that's a possibility. I haven't done a lot of that, so I'm just showing you this. So in order to print this, in order to ink it up without the Pronto plate rolling around the roller, that's the challenge, right? Well, it's really not that hard. So I've got a roller that's as wide as the image, and I'm just going to start in the middle and go off, and start in the middle and go off. And I'm just going to repeat that. And every place I put it down, like there I started a little bit past the middle. I'm just going to vary it a little bit so it's not exactly in the same spot every time it comes down. And I'm going to do about 4 of those or 5 of those. I think that might be 6. And then just repeat that. So you can see the plate backer's getting ink on it. There's nothing you can do about that. It's just a fact of life. If it starts to get out of control, if you were doing a really big edition, you might want to stop and clean it up. But I'm just going to let it be. Now the problem with that, of course, is if you wanted to print a big sheet of paper, it would be impossible to do it without getting ink on it unless you stopped and cleaned the press bed. You could roll this up on a glass pallet somewhere and then physically pick it up and print it on a larger sheet of paper, and then have a clean border. So that's an option. You can also print these things on an etching press if you want to. It's kind of hard to get the same quality, but it's definitely doable. Now this image has a little bit more ink on it, so I'm going to go back and recharge my roller once or twice during this roll up. And since we are doing a video here and I don't want to take all day, I'm going to go ahead and ink it up a little bit more the first time instead of going through the proofing. So I think I'll give this 6 sets. This is 3. Five might be enough. I'll do 5. Another way to print this with a clean border would be to cut a window into a piece of newsprint or something and lay it down on here to cover up the ink, or to take strips of paper and lay them down to cover the ink. But it usually embosses the paper and doesn't really look that great, so I prefer to do a bleed print. And then if you do a bleed print, you can mount that. If it's on a lightweight paper, you can mount that on a heavier paper. And then you have your clean border solved solution. Alright, so I'm going to print that. We're just going to use newsprint. Now just to show you a bleed print. Now maybe I'll do this. So this is torn exactly to the size of the image, including the border. So it's kind of hard to put down, but I'm going to do this by pulling this tight. I'm holding it here, and I don't have a T registration on here, so I'm just going to line it up and try to keep pulling it tight as I'm above it. And it's pretty good. I've got a little torner of the paper that got torn off there. If you get grease on your fingers, just stop and clean your fingers. Grease in printmaking is not a good thing. All right, so I'm just going to give you a little close-up view of the mechanism for engaging the press. I'm going to get this thing lined up. You can't see it, but I have my tape lined up here. And this pin on here rotates. There's a slot right here. The pin's on both sides. I'm just going to move that till it lines up. Now, sometimes it won't go in right away, so you need to see here, it didn't go in right away. If you just rotate the handle, it will go in. And you can see it's not going in right away, but as soon as it has pressure on it, it will. So I'm going to go ahead and lower this, and you'll hear it click in. If it doesn't engage, you're not going anywhere. You can turn this handle and nothing's going to happen. And when you get to the back, you lift it first. Disengage it by pulling the pin out and then resting it on the cylinder. And then you can go ahead and put it back in locked position. Okay, so we're ready to clean up. Take your plate off. If you want to reuse the plate, reprint it, you can run it through the press until at full pressure without inking it, until there's no image coming off on the newsprint. It'll probably take about 3 impressions on newsprint to strip most of the ink off. And then you would take your fountain solution and you'd pour it all over the plate and just clean the plate. I do this on a piece of newsprint. Okay. I'm not going to reuse this plate, so I won't do it today, but you'd use a white paper towel or a white rag, a light colored rag, and just clean the whole plate, and then when you're done, you put it away. If you get any grease on it, you want to clean that off, and then we're going to clean the palette. We use VOC, it's called Safer. You can buy this at Home Depot and other stores. And you can dilute it a little bit. There's directions on the packaging. And this stuff works great. There's no odor. There's no need to use mineral spirits. Some people use baby oil, but that's kind of, it smells nice, but it's expensive, and then you have to clean up the oil. And this works better, I think. And then actually, oddly enough, after you've used this, if you just use some water for any residual, the water will clean it up, or you can use simple green. For the tympan, you're going to scrape off the excess grease, and put it in the holder, and then with a clean rag, use denatured alcohol. We keep all these things near the press. Sometimes you might need to go looking for them. Somebody may have borrowed them and forgot to put back. So alcohol is the best thing to cut grease. Hopefully the other side's clean, because you only want to have grease on one side of the tympan. So it doesn't take long. Most people forget to do this. It's kind of irritating, because then when you have 2 tympans sitting next to each other in storage, they rub up on each other, and they get each other, grease gets on the wrong side of the clean tympan, if that makes sense. So give this a good cleaning, then put it away on the back of the press. Any newsprint that you've used that has ink on it but no grease, we're going to use that again. So once this ink dries, we can use the newsprint. So I'm going to put that neatly on top of the press to dry. You're going to take your tape off the press where you put it to mark your travel. That's what we call the travel. We're going to take the scraper bar out. Now you may want a piece of scrap paper, or in this case, we're going to use our handy old phone book just to kind of grab it. And I did not demo putting this in, so this is just the reverse of that. We're going to put this under here to catch the grease. And there's a screw back here. I'm just going to loosen it, and then this will come out. Okay, I can take this phone book and wipe this nasty grease off. This doesn't have to be perfectly clean, but you want to get the majority of the grease off so that when somebody goes to grab it and use it, they're not going to end up with a fistful of grease. Okay, so we're going to clean up the ink. I'm just going to remove this tape first. So for cleanup, you need a phone book, you need a scraper, one of these guys, and I recommend that you get one for yourself. They're like $3 or $4 at Home Depot, and you can keep it with your supplies, because when you need them, lots of times they're not in here. I don't know where they go, but they tend to disappear, and it makes cleanup go a lot faster. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to scrape this down. And if you've got a nice blade in there, it'll pick up 95% of the ink. And then every time it gets full, just put it on the phone book. Generally speaking, we save ink if there's a lot of it and it hasn't been used, but this isn't really enough to save, so I'm just going to put it onto the phone book. Now I can scrape that out, and when you've got that there, you can just take this, pull it off, and throw it in the trash. Okay, so when you're ready to clean the roller, and we've scraped the palette, we're just going to pour this all over it. And I'm going to twirl it to redistribute all that safer, and this loosens up the ink nicely. And it also dissolves the ink on the roller. And then I can take a piece of newsprint that is garbage, and I can roll this out on here to take up a lot of that ink. So that has stripped off a fair amount of the ink. And when you have something like this, you want to put it into the receptacle with the lid. There's red receptacle, so that actually it doesn't have many fumes in it, so it probably isn't that necessary. But if you had any solvent, you definitely want to put the rag or whatever you're using into that can. And then I can do the rest of this by hand. When you're using a rag, learn how to just use it efficiently. Like if you keep turning it and fold it in on itself, there are many surfaces of the rag that you can use. And I mean, I can do everything I've been doing today with one rag. The only exception might be here at the end when I want to clean the roller. I can go ahead and clean it with this rag most of the way. But at the very, very end, I'm going to use a clean rag or a clean paper towel to finish it, just to make sure everything is You want to make sure all the ink's off of there, because if it dries on, it forms a glaze that is almost impossible to get off. It hardens the roller. And then I can use that same rag and clean my scraper. I like to just clean the ink off, pulling it off of the scraper. And if you don't clean it off, it gets kind of to be a mess. And okay, so the last part of cleaning up is to you clean your roller as well as you can, and you want to make sure that you get the edges as well. So just rotate the roller and clean each edge. And then when you think it's clean, you can't really tell because we've used black ink on a black roller, so it may look clean, but this also helps rejuvenate the rubber. So I'm going to take this rubber roller wash, put it on a white paper towel, and just rotate the roller. And I'm going to do this until my rag is clean. So look how much ink came off. I'm going to do that again. There's still quite a bit on there. This stuff doesn't evaporate quickly, so unlike some other solvents, so you can just keep reusing that same rag. Get your edges. That's pretty good. I'm just going to hit it again with a dry cotton rag. Yep, and that's pretty good. And then you want to put this away. Keep it on the stand or put it in the shelves. Put the ink away, anything else that you've taken out.